There is a sentence that has been sitting at the center of this case since the moment this channel decided to build a video around it. Many of them hoped she'd never come back. 7 words. And if you parse them honestly, if you actually sit with them instead of reading past them, you will find that they do not have one meaning. They have at least 2, and both of them are true. And both of them are serious. And neither of them is the one most coverage has been focusing on. That sentence is not a tagline. It is the entire thesis of this video. Every act that follows is a different answer to the same question: which them are we talking about? And which she? We are not going to resolve that ambiguity early. We are going to earn the resolution. Let's start with the seat, not the case, not the disappearance, not the federal investigation or the ransom notes or the masked figure on the doorbell camera. Let's start where the first version of this sentence lives, inside a building in Midtown Manhattan on a program that has been on American television longer than most countries have had commercial broadcasting. The Today Show anchor desk is not a neutral object. It is one of the most commercially valuable pieces of real estate in American media. The program generates close to $200 million in annual advertising revenue in its first 2 hours alone. The face behind that desk is not merely talent. It is the product the entire revenue architecture is built around. Audiences do not watch the Today Show in the abstract. They watch the person at the Today Show. They wake up at the same time, turn on the same channel, and expect the same person to be there. That expectation is not sentiment. It is the foundational habit that advertisers pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year to reach. When that seat goes empty, not for 2 days, not for a week, but for 2 months, the institutional pressure around it does not pause out of respect for the personal circumstances. It intensifies because a vacant seat is not just a missing person, it is an opportunity. And morning television has a long, unsentimental history of what happens to opportunities. Savannah Guthrie stepped away from that desk on January 30th, 2026. She had already been on planned medical leave, vocal cord surgery, announced December 19th, 2025, a routine enough disclosure that her colleagues had given her a lighthearted send-off on air. She was supposed to be back in weeks, back for the Winter Olympics, back before anyone had time to get used to someone else being there. But on the night of January 31st, her mother was last seen being dropped off at her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. And on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, and the 2-week medical leave became something that did not have a return date attached to it. That is when the seat became interesting to people it had not been interesting to before. This is not an accusation. It is an observation about the structure of the environment. Morning television anchor seats at flagship programs do not sit empty without consequence. They generate institutional recalculations about talent deployment, about audience research, about the long-term strategic direction of programming that the people running it have been quietly discussing for years. An unexpected vacancy, even one created by tragedy, is still a vacancy. And vacancies are evaluated by people whose professional obligation is to fill them optimally. That is not cynicism. That is the institutional logic of a $200 million annual advertising product operating without its lead talent. The single most revealing institutional decision NBC made in the weeks following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance was not a statement, not a press release, not the careful management of coverage on the Today Show itself. It was the phone call to Hoda Kotb. Hoda Kotb left the Today Show on January 10th, 2025. 16 years, a proper farewell, the industry doing what it does when it wants to honor a departure it cannot argue with. When Hoda walked out of Studio 1A that day, the professional assumption was settled and mutual. That chapter was closed. She came back on February 9th, 2026, not as a guest, not for a retrospective. She came back to hold the anchor desk. And the reason that decision tells you more about how NBC assessed the situation than any statement could is this. You do not call Hoda Kotb back for a 2-week gap. You do not call someone a year out of retirement for a situation with a defined endpoint. You call Hoda Kotb back when you need the audience to feel continuity without noticing the absence, and when you genuinely do not know how long that absence will last. That is a very specific institutional calculation. It is the calculation of a network that has looked at what it knows about this situation and decided that the standard bench of contributing, Correspondence was not sufficient for what was coming. Morning television's product is not news, it is familiarity. Disrupt the faces, and you disrupt the trust, and you disrupt the revenue. Hoda Kotb was the most efficient available solution to a disruption NBC could not predict the duration of. The fact that she was necessary tells you something about the scale of the disruption, and the scale of the disruption tells you something about what was at stake, professionally, institutionally, while the seat sat empty. Craig Melvin was alongside her, steady, uncontroversial, the kind of anchor who does not become the story. That combination, Hoda's deep audience familiarity, Melvin's professional neutrality, was the most stable configuration NBC could construct around an inherently unstable situation. Here is what the Daily Mail reported, republished by the Irish Star. Sources inside the Today Show environment described it, during Savannah Guthrie's absence, as a viper's nest. And those same sources said that many saw, not some, many saw, at the network had hoped Savannah would never come back. That claim needs to be held with appropriate care. Unnamed sources speaking to a British tabloid is a provenance that does not demand credibility by default. We are not treating it as confirmed. We are treating it as reported. Specific, deliberate, and worth examining analytically, because the words chosen are not accidental. Viper's nest. Even if you're suffering, many hoped she'd never come back. Those are not the words of someone describing mild workplace friction. Those are the words of someone describing an environment where a colleague's prolonged absence in a family crisis was functionally useful to other people's ambitions, where the institutional logic of the vacancy, the opportunity it created, the airtime it redistributed, the leverage it shifted, was operating on people who are at the same time wearing yellow ribbons on camera and expressing solidarity to 4 million viewers. Morning television's surface and its interior have never been required to match. The history of the Today Show and of every major network morning franchise is a history of managed appearances around internal dynamics the audience never sees. This is not a cynical observation. It is the structural reality of any high-stakes commercial environment where careers are built on visibility and visibility is rationed by a single set of producers. Savannah Guthrie held the most visible position in that environment. Her absence did not just create an empty chair, it created a reallocation, and reallocations create winners. And winners, in some cases, develop an investment in the conditions that produce them. This is the first them, the professional one. And the phrase, hoped she'd never come back, in this context means, hoped the seat would stay open long enough to become someone else's permanently. That reading does not require malice. It does not require anyone to have wished harm on Savannah Guthrie or her family. It requires only the ordinary operation of professional self-interest inside a competitive institutional environment. The kind of self-interest that is so routine in high-stakes commercial television that most people inside it would not even register it as hope. It would register simply as observation. The seat is open, the situation is ongoing, and someone is going to benefit from that. The only question is who? And that question has a quiet way of shaping behavior in people who never consciously decide to let it. That reading does not require malice. It does not require anyone to have wished harm on Savannah Guthrie or her family. It requires only the ordinary operation of professional self-interest inside a competitive institutional environment, the kind of self-interest that is so routine in high-stakes commercial television that most people inside it would not even recognize it as hope. It would register simply as observation. The seat is open, the situation is ongoing, and someone is going to benefit from that. The only question is who, and that question has a way of shaping behavior in people who never consciously decide to let it. Before we get to the second them, the one that lives far outside Rockefeller Plaza, we need to spend a moment with the person who sits at the intersection of both. Savannah Guthrie is the central figure of this story. Not Nancy, not the investigation, not the Today Show. Savannah, because she is the person through whom both versions of the sentence run simultaneously. There is no professional training for this. The media coaching that prepares anchors for difficult live moments, breaking news, uncomfortable interviews, the controlled performance of emotion during tragedy, does not prepare you for being the tragedy, for being the story while also being required, eventually, to tell other stories. On March 26th and 27th, she gave a multi-part interview to Hoda Kotb on the Today Show, her first on-camera appearance since the disappearance. And within it, she said something that has stayed in the analytical record of this case. She said she did not know that her mother was taken because of money, that the ransom framework, the idea that this was simply someone targeting a wealthy family for financial gain, might not be the complete explanation. That would make sense, what she said, but we don't know. That is not an off-the-cuff statement. That is a woman who has sat in rooms with federal investigators, who has been told things that are not yet in the public record, communicating carefully with deliberate uncertainty that the story the public has been following may have a different shape underneath. Most of the coverage of this case has been organized around two dates: January 31st, the night Nancy Guthrie was last seen, and February 1st, the day she was reported missing. But in late March 2026, the Guthrie family issued a community appeal asking Tucson residents to review their home security footage, their text messages, their personal notes. And embedded in that appeal were three specific dates: January 31st, the early morning hours of February 1st, and the late evening of January 11th. January 11th, 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The significance of that date being in that appeal cannot be overstated. The family did not choose it randomly. The investigators who were involved in and aware of the appeal did not include it accidentally. When a federal investigation asks a community to look back at a specific evening 3 weeks before the crime, it is because the evidence suggests that something happened that evening that is connected to what happened on February 1st. What happens 3 weeks before a crime of this operational complexity? Surveillance, reconnaissance, the building of the operational picture that made the crime possible. Whoever entered Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of February 1st knew where the camera was, knew the layout of the property, knew enough about the target and the location to execute an operation that did not improvise its way through the night. That knowledge was built somewhere. And the investigators believe it may have been built, at least in part, on January 11th, 3 weeks of planning before the crime. This is not an opportunistic kidnapping. This is an operation with a construction period, and the construction period is now in the investigative record. What the January 11th date means for the insider knowledge framework this series has established is significant. An operational surveillance period does not happen at a random location in a residential neighborhood on a random night without some form of prior targeting. The location, the specific house on that specific street in the Catalina foothills, was chosen. And it was chosen because someone knew it, knew that Nancy Guthrie lived there, knew the layout of the property well enough to plan a night approach, knew the camera positions, or spent January 11th establishing them. The distance between knowing that address and executing an operation on that address is not random criminal luck. It is targeted intelligence. And targeted intelligence has a source. On February 10th, the FBI released what it had: 4 still images and a short video clip from the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's property. An individual at the front door in the early morning hours of February 1st, masked, gloved, armed. According to FBI Director Kash Patel, at 1:47 in the morning, the camera was deliberately tampered with. Less than an hour later, Nancy's pacemaker monitor missed its scheduled nightly data transmission, the last confirmed trace of her inside that home. Rather than simply cataloging what the footage shows, let's talk about what it means. Masking your face for a crime is not the point here. Point is this: the person on that footage did not wear a mask because they grabbed something from a closet on the way out the door. They wore a mask because they understood before that night, as part of the planning of that night, that a doorbell camera existed at that property, that it would capture a face if uncovered, and that a captured face is an investigation that ends. The mask is not a criminal instinct. It is an operational decision made in the planning phase. It belongs to January 11th or whenever the surveillance of that property was conducted. The gloves tell the same story. Gloves before entering a scene mean thinking about fingerprints. Thinking about fingerprints before you arrive means thinking about the investigation that comes after. That is pre-mission risk assessment. The Wi-Fi jammer theory, still unconfirmed by law enforcement as of this script, but reported as an active line of inquiry, would, if confirmed, add a third layer: a signal blocking Device requires knowing what signals exist at the target location and why interrupting them serves the operation. That is specialized knowledge applied to a specific location. Take the mask, the gloves, the jammer theory, and the January 11th surveillance date together. And what emerges is not a crime. It is a campaign, a deliberate, constructed, intelligence-driven campaign that began weeks before Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera went dark. And then, according to former FBI Special Agent Andrew Bringwell's public analysis, something went wrong. Here is the version of the ransom story that most coverage has not told. Multiple ransom notes arrived at media outlets within days of the disappearance. KOL, DTV, TMZ, others. Demanding payment in cryptocurrency, figures reported in the range of $6 million. Notes containing details about Nancy Guthrie's home and what she had been wearing on the night of January 31st. Details not publicly available, requiring prior knowledge of the victim. The FBI confirmed 2 communications were being taken seriously. 2 deadlines were set, both passed. On February 4th, Savannah and her siblings acknowledged the ransom letter in a public video. They said they were ready to talk. And on February 7th, "We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us and we will pay. We will pay," publicly, on camera, with Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces in American television, saying those exact words to whoever was watching. And then the kidnappers went silent. This is the moment every analytical framework about this case has to reckon with. A family publicly willing to pay. 2 deadlines already passed. No exchange. No proof of life. No counteroffer. No negotiation. The FBI stating it was not aware of ongoing communication. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas characterized a ransom motive as appearing less and less likely as the weeks passed. That is a precise analytical statement. The ransom arc stopped behaving like a ransom arc. A ransom arc that stops behaving like itself has one of a few explanations. The ransom silence is the single most analytically significant moment in the entire public record of this case. Not the doorbell footage, not the blood at the scene, the moment when the kidnappers received a public, on-camera, nationally broadcast declaration that the family was ready to pay, and then did not respond. That silence is not neutral. It is evidence of something. Either internal breakdown or misdirection, or an operation that had already achieved what it came to achieve and no longer needed the transaction to close. Each of those readings points toward a different architecture underneath the crime, and the federal investigation is currently working to determine which architecture it is. The operation may have broken down internally. A participant made a decision or created an exposure the unprecedented national media response made fatal to the plan. Or the ransom demands were misdirection, a visible framework placed over an operation whose actual objective was not payment but permanent removal. Or both things are partially true. The operation intended ransom and discovered it needed permanent silence when the pressure made a clean transaction impossible. What connects all 3 possibilities is former FBI Special Agent Andrew Bringwell's 4-word assessment. Something went wrong, not with the crime, with the plan behind the crime. Those are different things. Plans go wrong in specific, traceable ways, and federal investigations are designed to trace exactly those ways. The ransom silence is the most analytically significant moment in the entire public record of this case. Not the doorbell footage, not the blood at the scene, not the FBI press conferences. The moment when the kidnappers received a public, on-camera, nationally broadcast declaration from the family that they were ready to pay, and then did not respond. That silence is not neutral. It is either evidence of internal breakdown, evidence of misdirection, or evidence of an operation that had already achieved whatever it set out to achieve and no longer needed the transaction to close. Each of those readings points toward a different architecture underneath the crime, and the federal investigation is currently working to determine which architecture it is. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas's public observation that ransom was appearing less and less likely as the weeks passed is the expert analysis of someone reading that silence the same way. The sentence again, many of them hoped she'd never come back. The first them is inside a building in Midtown Manhattan. The second them is somewhere in the forensic record of this case, in cell tower data and financial records and digital communications, and they are not thinking about morning television at all. They are thinking about a witness. Nancy Guthrie was present. She heard what she heard and saw what she saw and knows in the way only a person physically present for something can know what happened in that house after the doorbell camera went dark. That knowledge is the most dangerous thing in this case. Not the forensic evidence, not the financial records. Those build a circumstantial case. A first-person account from the victim herself builds something that cannot be circumstantially challenged. For the people who organized what happened on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie returning home is not a resolution. It is the end of their safety. Every day she remains absent is a day her testimony cannot be given. Every day, the investigation works from forensics and cell data rather than her voice, and her memory is a day the case is harder to close and easier to fight. Think about what that means in practical terms. She was there. She may know a voice. She may have seen a face before the mask went on or after it came off. She may have been told something, shown something, given any fragment of identifying information that collapses the investigation from theory into fact. No piece of electronic evidence substitutes for that, and the people who organize this know it. This is the second them. The them that does not hope Savannah Guthrie never comes back to her desk. The them that needs Nancy Guthrie to never come back at all. Both thems exist simultaneously in the same case around the same family, pulling in the same direction by entirely different mechanisms. This is what makes this title genuinely different from a headline designed only to generate clicks. The sentence is not designed to imply a conspiracy between the Today Show and the people who took Nancy Guthrie. There is no such conspiracy. What the sentence illuminates is the specific, uncomfortable truth that a single prolonged absence can serve multiple different interests for completely different reasons simultaneously. The professional world that benefits from Savannah's empty seat and the criminal world that needs Nancy's continued absence do not communicate with each other, do not share motives, do not even know the other exists. They simply both point in the same direction. And Savannah Guthrie is the person at the center of both arrows. This is what makes this title genuinely different from the kind of headline that exists only to generate clicks. The sentence is not designed to imply a conspiracy between the Today Show and the people who took Nancy Guthrie. There is no such conspiracy. What the sentence is designed to do, and what this video has been building toward, is illuminate the specific, uncomfortable truth that a single prolonged absence can serve multiple different interests for completely different reasons simultaneously. The professional world that benefits from Savannah's empty seat and the criminal world that needs Nancy's continued absence do not communicate with each other, do not share motives, do not even know the other exists in most cases. They simply both point in the same direction, and Savannah Guthrie is the person at the center of both arrows. The public face of the Nancy Guthrie investigation has communicated very little of substance since the first 2 weeks. That absence of public communication has been interpreted by some as stagnation. It is not. Federal investigations do not communicate their progress. They communicate their conclusions at indictment or arrest or formal charge, and not before. The interval between investigative certainty and public action is construction time. What is being constructed is a case built to hold in front of a federal jury. The FBI moved its command post to Phoenix, long-duration logistics, not withdrawal. Sheriff Nanos told NBC Nightly News that investigators believe they know why the home was targeted. That is not "we are following leads." That is a stated internal conclusion about motive. Nanos also did not rule out that the suspect could strike again, which means there is a suspect picture, a motive picture, and a suspect still at large. The FBI returned to the neighborhood, asking residents about former neighbors who moved out before the disappearance, querying names of contractors at a nearby property under renovation, targeted elimination of a narrowed field. That is not an investigation running out of steam. That is an investigation that has moved past the initial canvas into something more specific. Meanwhile, Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cione's blue Honda CR-V, the last vehicle Nancy was in before she disappeared, remained in FBI custody as of mid-March, reportedly dismantled and forensically examined at a mechanic shop under law enforcement supervision. The family has been formally cleared. The vehicle's examination is forensic processing for trace evidence, not suspicion, procedure, and Sheriff Nanos himself is fighting a recall effort, a no-confidence vote from his own union, and a board of supervisors invoking a territorial-era law to require his sworn reports. The FBI's operational primacy in this investigation is not incidental. It is the structural response to the institutional instability around the man nominally leading it locally. What the federal investigation is building, methodically and out of public view, is a case designed not to satisfy a news cycle, but to survive a federal trial. The difference in those two standards is enormous. Press conferences require enough to make a statement. Indictments require enough to hold up through pre-trial motions, through discovery, through cross-examination, through jury deliberation. The FBI is not building for the former, it is building for the latter. And that work, the financial records, the cell tower data, the vehicle forensics, the behavioral analysis, the narrowing of the suspect field takes months. The silence is not absence of progress. It is the sound of a case being built to last. Savannah Guthrie occupies a position in this story that morning television has not produced before. She is the daughter of a missing woman, a public figure whose every move is analyzed for investigative information, a family member navigating a federal case from inside it, and a person returning to a professional environment that sources described while she was away as a viper's nest. Her public profile has functioned as both burden and resource throughout this case. As a burden, she cannot be invisible. Every absence generates headlines. Every return generates more. She cannot grieve privately because her profession has made private grief structurally impossible for her. As a resource, the speed at which this became a national story within hours before local law enforcement had fully mobilized is directly traceable to her name. A federal task force does not stand up in days for a missing elderly woman in the Tucson suburbs unless that woman's daughter is one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. The scale of the institutional response was shaped from the first hours by who Savannah Guthrie is. On March 27th, Hoda Kotb announced that Savannah would return on April 6th at the end of an emotionally devastating interview, not in a managed press moment. The network let the return announcement live inside Savannah's uncertainty. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'll belong anymore, but I would like to try.
I've been so grateful to have this family. I consider this my family, my greater family. And when times are hard, you want to be with your family. And I want to be with my family. And so I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'll belong anymore. But I would like to try.
That is not a communication strategy for a clean comeback. That is the only honest framing available for a return that cannot be dressed up, because the reason for the absence has not been resolved, and everyone knows it. Craig Melvin said she was coming back because she was not going to let sadness win. Savannah said her joy would be her protest. Both statements are framing a return that cannot be called a resolution because it isn't one. The case is still active. Her mother is still missing. The second them is still out there, unindicted, somewhere in the evidence trail the FBI is following. Savannah Guthrie occupies a position in this story that morning television has not produced before. She was already on medical leave when her mother disappeared, vocal cord surgery planned and announced. What she did not have a plan for was a federal kidnapping investigation running concurrently with her recovery. She is simultaneously the daughter of a missing woman, a public figure whose every movement is analyzed for investigative significance, a family member navigating a federal case from inside it, a journalist by training who must manage the gap between what she knows and what she can say, and a woman preparing to return to an environment that sources described while she was away as a viper's nest. Her public profile has been both burden and resource. As a burden, she cannot grieve privately. Her profession has made private grief structurally impossible. Every absence generates headlines. Every return generates more, and every word she says in an interview is cross-referenced against the investigative record by audiences who have been following this case for months. As a resource, the speed at which this became a national story is directly traceable to her name. A federal task force does not stand up in days for a missing elderly woman in the Tucson suburbs without that woman's daughter being one of the most recognizable faces in American television. The scale of the institutional response, the FBI, the national media saturation, the million-dollar reward infrastructure was shaped from the first hours by who Savannah Guthrie is. Whether that ultimately helps bring Nancy home is one of the central unanswered questions of this case. We have been building toward this for the entire video. Let's say it clearly. Many of them hoped she'd never come back. In the first reading, she is Savannah Guthrie. Them is a group of people inside one of the most powerful morning television programs in America. Hoped she'd never come back means hoped the anchor seat that opened up in the circumstances of a family tragedy would remain open long enough to become something else. The Daily Mail's sources use the words "viper's nest." The claim is single source and unverified, but specific. And specificity in unverified reporting tells you something about the state of the environment it describes. In this reading, the sentence is about institutional ambition, about the unsentimental calculus of a commercially driven television environment that does not pause its internal competitions for personal crises, about the gap between what the cameras show and what the sources described behind closed doors. In the second reading, a she is Nancy Guthrie. Them is the person or people who organized what happened in the Catalina foothills on the night of January 31st. Hoped she'd never come back means hoped the only living witness to a federal kidnapping would never return to give testimony that collapses the investigation from circumstantial to direct. In this reading, the sentence is about exposure, about the specific mortal vulnerability of everyone involved in an organized criminal operation when the person they organized it against is still alive and still reachable. About the difference between a case built on forensic traces and a case built on the voice of someone who was there. Both sentences are true. They exist simultaneously. They involve different people, different motivations, different scales of consequence. But they circle the same absence, the same return, and the same person standing at the intersection of both. And here's the thing that does not get said often enough. They reinforce each other's invisibility. The professional them benefits from a narrative in which Savannah's absence is explained entirely by the criminal case, because as long as the story is about the disappearance and the investigation and the family's anguish, nobody is looking too closely at who is sitting in her chair or how they feel about being asked to vacate it. And the criminal them benefits from a narrative in which the Today Show angle is treated as tabloid noise, because as long as the workplace politics story absorbs the media's appetite for institutional drama, the forensic and behavioral evidence trail gets less analytical attention than it deserves. The sentence, "many of them hoped she'd never come back," does not allow either of those deflections. It holds both meanings simultaneously and refuses to let you choose between them. Savannah Guthrie went back to that desk on April 6th, 2 months after her mother was reported missing, with no arrest, no named suspect, no resolved investigation. Not because the criminal them had been resolved, not because the professional them had been confronted or answered. She went back because she decided that absence was not a posture she was willing to hold indefinitely for either of them. The investigation has not resolved, and the record shows it. The second them is still out there, still unindicted, still waiting to find out how much the federal evidence has built against whatever they thought they had gotten away with. And the first them, the institutional one, has now had to resume sharing a desk with the person some of them reportedly hoped would not return. Both stories are still live. Both sentences still mean something, and this case is not over. Every video in this series has been built around one discipline, not reporting what is already reported, but applying analytical attention to what the record actually contains, and being honest about the difference between what is confirmed and what is constructed from it. This case has a confirmed federal investigation, confirmed ransom notes containing non-public details about the victim's home and clothing, a confirmed masked individual on confirmed surveillance footage, a confirmed community appeal flagging January 11th 3 weeks before the crime, as analytically significant, a confirmed statement from the lead sheriff that investigators believe they know why the home was targeted, a confirmed report that many at the Today Show hoped the anchor would not return, a confirmed formal accountability process against the man nominally leading the local investigation. None of those things, taken alone, resolves the case. All of them, taken together, build a picture that is more specific, more disturbing, and more analytically grounded than the standard coverage has produced. The picture is not complete, but it is significantly more developed than the surface version suggests, and it is the picture this series has been documenting since this case began. The answers are still coming. The investigation is 58 days active and building toward a conclusion that has not yet arrived publicly, but that the available evidence suggests is further along internally than the public record reflects. When this reaches the courtroom, when the indictment lands or the arrest is made or the discovery changes every other variable, this channel will be here. Because this channel doesn't fill time, it builds the record, and the record in this case is not finished. If you have been watching this series and you are not subscribed, you are one algorithm decision away from missing the moment when this case breaks. Every new episode on this channel goes to subscribers first. The next video in this series is already in production. You know what to do.